Guess what I've got in my mug, Curtis? Exactly.
What?
Snapple raspberry tea. I got it at Jewel Osco. My mom gave me some money for it.
Congratulations.
Mm-hmm. Say hi, Jacob.
Hi.
We have a special guest on today. This
do.
is my boy Jacob. He is our roommate, me and Curtis's roommate over the
For
summer.
the summer?
Yeah. Ooh. And so we all saw this movie together, and then we decided later to talk about it.
First Reformed.
Hooray. Starring Ethan Hawke and whoever else. I don't have it up here.
Amanda Seyfried.
Yeah. Amanda French Fry.
Cedric the Entertainer.
Yep.
Yeah, I saw his name before we went to go see it, and I was like, what?
Yeah.
That's quite the name.
I only saw the Cedric Kyle's or whatever his actual name is.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, that's who that is.
Right.
He's in stuff. He's
yeah.
popular.
I kind of figured because of the name, but that's just me.
What, do you think he entertains people or something?
I kind of considered.
Oh, you were wrong.
Yeah.
But all right, so let's talk about I'll just read you a plot description.
Yeah, as per usual, Curtis will read the plot summary. Go for it, Curtis.
Yeah. According to IMDb, the plot summary is: a priest of a small congregation in upstate New York grapples with mounting despair brought on by tragedy, worldly concerns, and a tormented past. So essentially, we've got Ethan Hawke playing a priest in a little church in New York who ends up being forced to be confronted by a lot of things that he hasn't really thought about before, and we kind of watch his internal struggle play out externally, and we get to watch a lot of contrasting views that come to play in his life just kind of crash into each other.
Right. So yeah, I mean, it's relatively a straightforward story, but it becomes quite the complicated one as, of course, the more we get into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. First impressions. I remember we watched this trailer. I know you and I, Curtis, saw this trailer in You Never Really Hear, I believe.
Yes, that was when we first saw the trailer.
Right. And I remember it was that and Beast, and I haven't seen Beast yet, but I remember being very impressed with both of those.
Yeah.
When did you first hear about this, Jacob?
So I think it was I had subscribed to the A24 YouTube channel literally the day before this trailer dropped, and I saw it then, and I was super impressed by it. And then I also saw it again in front of Lean on Pete.
Okay.
And then I also saw it in front of You Were Never Really Here.
Gotcha.
So,
I also heard about it on the A24 podcast.
That's right.
They did Paul Schrader and Sofia Coppola did an interview together.
Right.
On the most recent episode, at least at the time of this recording, the most recent episode. So definitely check that out if you want to get more in-depth information on where this is all kind of coming from, because it's super interesting.
Yeah, there is some spoilers, but they mention where it's at in the podcast.
Yeah, which is super nice of them.
Yeah, that was kind of nice that they told you, hey, by the way, at this point in the podcast, things are going to get a bit on the spoiler side.
Yeah, I skipped over it. I'm going to have to go back and listen to that part.
I didn't listen to the whole thing, but I did get a good chunk finished. It was about maybe 10, 15 or so minutes.
Yeah, I was on a flight, so I had all the time I needed.
Right. Okay, well, let's just go ahead and start talking about the director, man, because
Paul Schrader.
He's had quite a name for himself. Raging Bull
Mostly
and
as a
Taxi
writer.
Driver. Yes. Raging Bull and Taxi Driver are the two movies that stick out from him that I'm aware of. I haven't seen either of them, but I'm definitely aware of them.
Yeah, he also wrote the screenplay for The Last Temptation of Christ, which was a big one.
Yes, that's a Scorsese.
That's a very interesting movie.
American Gigolo. Other than that, that's pretty much.
Well, he also
He's done some directing as well, but
yeah, he also directed American Gigolo, and then Blue Collar and Hardcore.
Oh yeah, Blue Collar.
Classic.
He's done a couple other things, but
He did that movie called Dog Eat Dog, which is Nicolas Cage and what's his name?
Willem Dafoe.
Yeah, Willem Dafoe.
Yeah.
It looks so just outrageously and just like so funny, just like it's going to be so insane.
Right. Yeah. Ralph
But
the
like
movie
clearly
maker.
that's what he's going for.
Yeah, Ralph the movie maker did an episode like the Nick Cage-a-thon or whatever it's called, and he talked about that movie. That's how I remember that movie.
Yeah, from what it looks like, his more recent career has been more him doing what he wants, and not really caring what other people think.
Yeah, he
'Cause-
talked about that some in the podcast.
Yeah, it's like the Canyons, especially. This is the only film that I've only seen First Reformed of his, but like he did a Kickstarter fundraiser for the Canyons. He put Lindsay Lohan in it, which we all know is such a huge box office draw. It's such a smart move.
Classic.
But he's definitely doing what he wants,
oh yeah.
and I think
so far that's paying off.
well
If we're taking it at this.
with this one
level.
movie.
Right. Yeah, I mostly just know him from Raging Bull and that other movie that I mentioned. But like I said, I haven't
Taxi
seen
Driver?
it. That's the one, yeah. I haven't seen either of those. Well, so, I mean, it is pretty clear that this is a pretty experienced director that we're talking about.
Yeah, he kind of came to be in the same era that Spielberg did.
Right.
And George Lucas and
Scorsese.
Yeah, all of those guys. Francis Ford Coppola, which was so fun to hear him do that interview with Francis's daughter.
Yeah, it was.
But yeah, so he kind of came in this semi-golden age of like transformative movie making, especially with guys like Spielberg and George Lucas like changing the entire game
Right.
of what movies were going to be. So he really has a lot of experience with a lot of really, really talented people and a lot of huge names.
Yeah.
One other thing that I don't know where I read this, but apparently when Scorsese was trying to make Silence, which I know I have not seen, but both Curtis and Alan
We have a podcast.
absolutely love. And after hearing this, I really want to see it. He was actually telling Scorsese while he was struggling to make the film that if Scorsese couldn't do it, he really wanted to do it in his place.
I think I remember reading about that, but I didn't mention it in the podcast because it wasn't fitting with everything else we were talking about. But I do remember reading about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're all tight. At least on a surface level, they're all tight.
Absolutely.
Which I also did a lot of other reading about Schrader and his background just through kind of trying to sort through my thoughts on First Reformed. And he's like he grew up in Grand Rapids. He was raised in a Reformed Calvinist Christian tradition. He went to a college in that tradition in Grand Rapids. I think it was actually Calvin College. So like he got like his bachelor's, I think, in theology of some kind. So
Yeah, his first degree was in theology.
Yeah, I do remember he did mention this in the podcast.
Yeah,
for
he talks a lot about his entire backstory, like because a lot of those things are what kind of brought him into making this movie.
Right.
So you can really see,
wait, really? I had no idea.
yeah.
Couldn't tell at all.
So you can really see his kind of fingerprint all throughout everything that's taking place in this film.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So should we get to more of the plot?
Yeah,
elements now that we've kind of talked about context.
Yeah, I was just about to say that we can start getting into the plot now. So, what should we get into first, Curtis? What do you think? What do you think we should get into first?
I mean, I guess we can talk about the plot.
Okay.
Just give it a summary. That way, when we start pointing back to things, everybody knows where we're going with stuff.
So I guess we can probably call a little bit of spoilers here.
Yeah, here's the thing. This movie is very hard to talk about without talking about spoilers.
That is true.
Because if you don't talk about the things that are happening in the film, everything is very...
ambiguous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like incredibly ambiguous.
That's fair.
Just because everything is so interconnected and so deep, like so intertwined with everything else, which is one of the things that I absolutely love about this movie.
Right.
That kind of makes it hard to not address spoilers.
Right.
So we kind of have to talk about it by default.
Right.
So I guess we'll say, why don't we just talk about like our quick, I liked it, I didn't like it stuff, and then we'll dive in real deep. That way people that don't want to know spoilers don't have to listen.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do that. Let's begin with what we think overall.
So
and
go
then
ahead and start.
Yeah.
And we'll go around the table.
So you go ahead and start, Jacob, if you want to.
Great.
Pass it to you.
Yeah.
The first timer who doesn't know how this podcast operates is the one that gets to go first.
Fine. I'll do it.
No, I changed my mind. I want to
Okay.
do it now.
One of you go. I don't care.
Go, Curtis.
Fine. I really, really liked First Reformed. It was captivating, incredibly entertaining. I was enthralled with every frame. It has a lot of really interesting messages and a lot of really interesting things to talk about, along with a performance that I think is just incredible from Ethan Hawke. Incredible confidence from the director's seat and from the writer's seat from Paul Schrader. I can't really think of a ton of complaints that I have unless they're just nominal, because even the complaints that I have make sense in the context that I'm seeing them in. So I'm not sure what I would rate it yet, but I'd have to think about it a little more. It's still kind of sitting with me. I know we saw it over a day ago at this point.
Right.
But it's still kind of sitting there, kind of, I guess, marinating and trying it hasn't fully set in yet. So maybe by the time we get to the end of this, I'll be able to give it a rating. But for now, I'm just going to say this was awesome and everybody needs to go see it.
Yeah, this is quite the slow movie, but it's one of those slow burns because it takes its time to develop its ideas, but in a way that it is so slow that it really sticks with you, like you said, Curtis, and it kind of makes you marinate and think about it after you leave the movie. And that's one thing I really like. Okay, I love this kind of filmmaking. This is very similar to Ghost Story, both in terms of style and in terms of like how it's constructed, because it is just so slow. So I really enjoyed that. My really only complaints, and they're kind of minor, is some of the acting is kind of but then again, some of it makes sense, like you were saying, in the context of the movie, it makes a little bit more sense. Maybe it has a couple of focus issues where it's not completely on point, or
it's not that I don't agree with you.
Yeah,
it's just they make sense to me in the world that has been set up.
Right,
but
right.
That's not a perspective that everybody has the opportunity to see. But
right,
that's kind of hard to explain unless we get into spoilers.
Right, and so although it has a bit of a focus issue, it's not that bad. Like it's a small issue. Like I said, these are pretty minor complaints that I have. But overall, yeah, I pretty much agree with everything you said. There's a clear 3-act structure here, but it takes each act and explores a more direct and more specific idea per each act. And then that ultimately amounts to what the climax ends up being in the end. And I found it to be very interesting, which is maybe part of where my focus, that issue of focus kind of comes in a little bit. But overall, yeah, I really did enjoy First Reformed. I found it to be very engaging and very interesting, especially especially with these long conversations, especially that first one with Michael that Ethan Hawke has. I found to be very, very interesting and very thought-provoking. And later on in the movie, it just keeps going, and there's basically a snowball. So yeah, I'm agreeing with you, Curtis. I did really enjoy First Reformed. I found it to be I would even say refreshing. Just because of how it does talk like these very hard Christian themes, but at the same time, we're diving into a realm that is, I think it's morally gray.
Oh, it clashes with itself so much.
Yeah.
And that is so fun to see.
Yeah.
And so intriguing to see. For the most part, I was just enthralled by all of that.
Yeah.
Especially coming from a theological perspective, but we will talk about that later.
Right. All right, Jacob, your turn.
Okay. I was going to let this film sit for a little bit longer before I wrote about it, because I have a blog where I write stuff about movies.
Link in the description.
Yeah, it's down below there. And I was going to let it marinate longer, and I was going to try to get my thoughts out before I started to give it a rating, because usually that's what I like to do, kind of like to spill out my thoughts. And with this one, immediately after I saw it, it was one of the most emotionally resonant experiences I've had watching a movie. I have seen very few films that have affected me to this level with this many facets of my life. Getting this many emotions to play inside my head, and making me think in the way that it does. I think this is a completely perfect film, and I think I'm more with Curtis on some of the flaws that Alm was pointing out, because we talked about this for a long time last night.
Yeah, we did.
And I think when we get past spoilers, I think a lot of what we're saying will make a lot more sense.
Right. We're kind of being pretty vague, but
we have to be.
Yeah, we have to be vague. I think it's one of the best films I've seen ever, and I don't throw that around. I haven't, like, the last time I gave a film a completely perfect score like this was a few years ago, and I had a very similar effect, but completely different direction with La La Land. It's like, for me, it's one of the best films I've seen. I think there's a lot that we'll get into with themes where I'll be able to talk a little more freely, but I mean, I have virtually no actual complaints with this film. I just think it's, I don't know. I loved all of its themes. I loved Ethan Hawke's performance. I think he is, if he doesn't get nominated for an Oscar in the next award season, I will probably throw something at my TV, or rather my roommate's TV, so he'll be very upset if he doesn't as well. But yeah, I think I know I'm being very vague right now, but I absolutely love this film. And I think, I don't know if everybody should go see it, because I don't know if everybody will appreciate it, but if you have any interest in anything's theological or philosophical or can I say environmental? Because that's in the trailer a little bit.
Yeah.
I just didn't know if that was spoiler territory or not. But yeah, if you have any interest in any of those ideas, you need to see this film in any way possible. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and I mean, that kind of goes into, who really is this movie for? I would even say that even if it looks, I would definitely advise to go see it, because it has a lot of things to say. And like, when we left the theater, we talked for quite a while. The basic points of what the message it was trying to get out. And there's a lot to it. But that being said, it is very thought-provoking and does bring up pretty much a battleground between a number of different things that I didn't exactly put much thought into before this.
And if I may, if a thought-provoking film, if a thought-provoking film scares you and that idea doesn't seem like a good thing to you, don't worry. This film isn't like super ambiguous about its themes, I don't think. Like,
it felt pretty straightforward.
It's pretty straightforward with the things.
We're also coming from a very special perspective.
Yes, we are. We are coming from a very special perspective. But I think for a lot of people, this film will make more sense than most quote unquote thought-provoking films.
Right.
That you might talk about a lot. So I like that. So I think it bridges that gap between being really artistic, being more of an indie film in its flair, but also being very understandable to a lot of a mainstream audience.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's get into spoilers.
All right. Official spoilers. These are spoilers, just so you know. If you haven't seen it yet or really don't care, whatever. But we're getting into those now.
Woo.
Here we go.
All right.
3, 2, 1, go. Let's talk about the plot.
Thanos dies.
Wait a minute.
That's not for First Reformed.
Or
all right.
A real spoiler.
So, do we want to... Okay, so...
Let's just start. Let's just walk through it.
Okay, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's just walk through it.
So we start at the top. Ethan Hawke is the priest the local priest for First Reformed Church in upstate New York, which is...
It's a satellite.
Yeah, now it's a satellite. At one point in time, it was one of the very first churches in the area. It's like super old from the 1700s or 1800s.
Right.
And it's a very historic site. It is now the property of another church called Abundant Life, which is,
exactly
nice. But it's also like this huge mega churchy looking thing. I'm going to try not to speak in churchese, but it's hard not to.
Yeah.
Full disclosure, Jacob and I are studying to become pastors, and Alan has grown up in the church his whole life.
Yes.
So,
And the two of us, Curtis and I, have worked at churches for like the past 3 years, pretty much.
We are currently sitting at the church that I work at to record this podcast. So,
Exactly.
if that gives you any indication of the perspective that we're coming from on this film, that will help you a lot. So if there are words that I say that don't sound normal to you as a listener, feel free to look them up, because I may end up getting into some churchese or some theological dialogue that may not make sense to just a normal person.
Yeah.
Because I tend to go into those sorts of things, especially with a movie that is so theologically rooted.
And
we'll
makes
try
sense
to
translate.
Right, we'll
obviously.
translate as best we can. But regardless, it's a mega church, Abundant Life, that kind of owns this property now. And Ethan Hawke's character, whose name is Reverend Toller, is essentially just the gatekeeper for this place. It's pretty much just a gift shop at this point, a historic site that people come through, but nobody goes to church there.
And he calls it that too. Well, he acknowledges people call the church that.
Yeah,
like at Abundant
Life.
Life.
The youth group at Abundant Life calls it like the gift shop church or something. Because they only have maybe 10 parishioners.
Yeah, maybe a dozen
at the
most.
church.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's kind of the setting that we are kind of thrown into at the beginning. This juxtaposition between the megachurch that has like its own food court and this little tiny church that's like just barely making it, that are so deeply interconnected to each other.
Yeah.
And it's such an interesting contrast already. And that's like the very first thing we see.
Right. And I love that they explore this basically it's a battle between these two churches, because one, the small church, is very reminiscent of my grandparents' church, which, although it has a bigger...
My own local church.
Yeah. Now, for my grandparents' church, they have a lot more people that attend there on a regular basis, of course, but it looks very, very similar to that church that I just kind of grew up in as just like a kid whenever I went to visit my grandparents, versus this other church that is, like you said, basically a mega church. It seats 5,000, as 5,000. They say. Very big, everyone goes there, very expensive. And so that is almost reminiscent of maybe my own church, which seats only about 600. But I've seen this dichotomy before, but of course not to this extent. But I can see, in my own life, I can see where these two churches come together in my own mind.
Yes. And for Jacob and I taking these courses, we learn about theology of a church, and we compare and contrast different things that do that. And this film, I would say, obviously tends to favor the small church.
Yeah.
Because that's the character that we're following. It's not like innately doing that because it's better, but it was such an interesting dynamic to watch happen on a screen versus in a lecture.
Right.
I'm actually going to disagree with you a bit there, Curtis. I think, and you said a word earlier, that word was juxtaposition. We will be saying that a lot throughout this. We said that word probably more times than any other keyword last night.
It's going to happen a lot.
Because, in all honesty, I think the exploration in the church dynamic here is not, like, I think this film, even though it puts everything through the perspective of Ethan Hawke's character, even with this relationship, it does side a little bit with him, but it's not like it doesn't really favor any sides in the arguments that it puts out.
No, I'm not saying in the argument. I'm saying just in the sense that because we're following Reverend Toller, we tend to
we
tend to side with that just as a viewer, I don't think the movie's making any claims at all as to which one is superior or inferior, other than through the perspective of what we are sympathizing with, which has to work for us to associate ourselves with this character. Right. So I don't think that that's a claim that it's trying to make by any means.
Right.
But it's a very interesting contrast right off the bat.
Yeah, and I love how one of the main things between these two churches is money, because obviously the small church is, like we mentioned this before, it's barely staying afloat, where it's hardly making it through every Sunday.
It was almost turned down. It was almost shut down.
Right.
Until a big corporate energy company ended up saving it by paying for all the money. Or paying for all the money. That's not even a sentence. What am I doing? Paying for the restoration of the building and keeping it afloat for X amount of time.
Right.
And that same company also is consistently, in return, is getting money from Abundant Life.
Right.
They're like the second or third largest donor to this energy company.
Right. You have something to say, Jacob?
I did. I think so about the whole money thing too, I think it's really interesting so a little more about Ethan Hawke's character before I go into this. So he is a ex-military chaplain who he has a lot of tragic stuff happen. Like his son got killed after 6 months in the military because he kind of pushed him to go to it.
And then his wife left him.
And everybody left him.
Yeah, well, he was completely abandoned.
Yeah, and because of that, it seems like what happened is this pastor at Abundant Life, the senior pastor, Jeff Jeffers, which is a name in this movie. I'm not making fun of it.
That's funny.
Jeff Jeffers.
It's such a pastor name.
That's his name.
It is. That's the greatest thing.
It's such a pastor name.
But he kind of takes him under his wing. He gives him this pastorate at this church. So he owes everything to Abundant Life. And I think we definitely see that play out in the relationship between the two, because
he definitely starts out with this just innate loyalty to whatever's happening there.
But it's not just a loyalty though. Like what I noticed is that he doesn't want to be a burden to them. Like he says, I don't want to bother them, because right in the beginning of the movie, there's a plumbing leak in the men's bathroom that he tried to fix earlier, and he wasn't able to fix it. Like he fixed it, and then it leaked again. And the guy the organist, I think it was.
Yeah, I think so.
Said, just call Abundant Life and get them to fix it. And he's like, I don't want to bother them with it. Like, he doesn't want to be in the debt of Abundant Life because he feels like he already is so much.
Yeah,
right.
And he feels like I think that's another point towards the contrasting views of the churches. Like clearly, it's Abundant Life that's doing all the work around here. So there's no reason for First Reform to be getting in the way of that just because there's a leak in the bathroom.
Right.
They can fix that themselves, so why bother the guys that are doing the real ministry?
Right. And then as we get farther into the movie,
it becomes more and more clear.
Yeah, and we start to see that, at least from the view of Toller, Abundant Life, the pastor Jeff Jeffers, at least in his mind, is blinded by money because he is, as we find out, he was endorsed by Balk. I think it's what it's called.
Yeah. B-A-L-Q.
Yeah.
Oh, Q. K is the baseball term.
Right. Yeah. So they were endorsed by Balk, which is essentially, remind me again, it's an energy company?
It's a huge energy company that is mega involved in polluting the earth.
Right.
Yeah. And we find out.
And they're
eventually.
local too. It's not, yeah.
Yeah, they're a local energy company, but they're pretty big, and they tend to cut corners.
And they're pretty much responsible for polluting this one lake that also becomes very important in the movie.
Right. And so
that's our whole context.
Yeah.
That's where we get placed into. It's pretty simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty simple.
No big deal.
Like we said, the story is simple, but everything going into making the story is very complex.
Oh, it's very detailed, yeah.
Yeah. And
which
so
is, from a pastoral perspective, absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
Because that's what we do daily.
Right. I knew that I brought up my criticism of this movie has a bit of a lack of focus, and then that's what you said to me was that this is basically the life of a pastor because they are running around day in and day out with hardly a connection between one event and the next.
Yeah, but somehow they're all, everyone is connected to somebody else somehow, so you always have to be aware of every context that you're
Right.
walking into.
Yeah.
Right.
And on top of all of this, there's a couple, one of the few that attend First Reformed,
Mary and Michael.
Mary and Michael. Mary approaches Reverend Toller and says, "My husband is having some problems. I was wondering if you would talk to him. He said he would agree to meet with you." What we learn is that he is an environmental activist who is starting to become more and more extreme. And he found out that Mary was pregnant. And I just said that and realized the alliteration there.
Yep.
That was wild.
And fun fact, Amanda Seyfried was actually pregnant while filming this movie.
She was.
That
So
is pregnant.
we find out that Mary was pregnant. And Michael wants to get rid of the baby because he's concerned about the life that child will lead in an environment that is already doomed for destruction in our lifetime.
Right. And this brings in what I found to be probably, in my mind, the most interesting aspect is, how do we raise a child in a world that we know is basically doomed?
Which is more of a theological question, just framed in like an environmental perspective.
Right, right. And so they use the environmental aspect to bridge, or essentially, I think we were talking about this last night. You said that it was basically a vehicle of getting this idea across. Not necessarily a theme, but more of just
Well,
a
it's
way
also
of
a
representing
theme.
it.
Well, yeah. So kind of the way I phrased, because there's a lot of different vehicles for that in this movie. I phrased, like when I was pinning down my thoughts, it's basically being a treatise on the differences between facades of authenticity and the real thing. And it uses, and it also has a lot of other things about like fear and a fear of authenticity versus a fear of facades. Like it deals with so much related to that idea of real versus fake. And the environmental thing is probably, it uses that throughout most of it. And it deals, like, the church dichotomy that we've been mentioning, it plays a big part in that, too.
And now we are encountering the dichotomy of environmentalism versus
Corporate America a little bit.
Christian thought as well.
Yeah.
Right. This I also found to be very interesting, and this is one of the things that is carried throughout the film for the most part.
And for the record, that's Christian, conservative, evangelical thought.
Not generally Christian
It's not
thought.
generally Christian thought.
Yes.
Because this
Christian thought is a bad term to use in general.
Yes. Right. So I'm going to go ahead and put this disclaimer in there. You can decide if you want to edit this out or not, Alan. But just a disclaimer, if we say the word Christian thought in this movie, or if we talk about the Christian perspective, and we're not explicitly referring to Ethan Hawke's character or his church, we're probably talking about evangelical, white, conservative America.
I would agree.
Yeah.
So
Unless we're talking about Reverend Toller.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, unless we specifically mention Toller, then we're probably going to be talking about what you guys talk about.
Yeah. But it's such an interesting dynamic.
Right.
And it would have worked with other things besides environmentalism, but that was such a smart choice.
Right.
Because it appears to be juxtaposed, but not too far.
Right. And I like how this is essentially a topic, at least in my own experience, I think we mentioned this yesterday when we were talking, that we don't really see in the church as much.
Right.
I mean, it's a thing, yes, but it's not something that we are essentially concerned about, which is where this movie takes it and challenges that and says, why aren't you?
Yeah, exactly. And that's and that kind of pushes Toller to start thinking about all of these things.
Yeah.
Right? He starts to question the things that he was so sure of, like relying on this church who's paying money to a corporation that is deliberately like cutting corners and harming the environment, when he's starting to recognize, well, the environment is God's creation and we're being called to take care of it, and why aren't we taking care of it? And that's something that never would have been brought to his mind without his conversation with Michael.
Right.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't have been so elevated had it not been for Michael's eventual suicide.
Right. And I love that. So Michael, he commits suicide, but I like the line that they have where She says, I can't remember the exact line, but she basically says that he wasn't a Christian. He never was saved.
She was the religious one.
Yes, she was the religious one. He never got into that. And so we know from a Christian perspective that he has essentially gone to hell at this point, which is so interesting because his way of thinking has influenced Ethan Hawke's character to take action.
Yeah, and for arguably the positive, for the good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which I just find to be very interesting. I cannot say that I've ever seen this in a Christian movie, or a movie that is explicitly Christian, that I have seen at all.
Yeah.
I just find it to be very interesting.
I think there's one other thing we left out, and that is that his wife finds a bomb vest in their garage.
That happens right before he
that
commits
happens
suicide.
right before he commits suicide, and she gives the vest to Reverend Toller, and then I think what we assume is that he finds that the vest is gone. He assumes what has happened, and then he blows his head off.
Yeah, he goes to take action.
Right. We get that through essentially indirect dialogue. That is what happens.
Yes,
right.
And we also, and this is one other thing too. That scene where he and Toller are talking is absolutely breathtaking.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite scenes in the film, hands down, because I don't know, we didn't mention really Schrader's style in this film a whole lot. I remember you saying last night, Alan, you can count the number of moving shots on one hand.
Yes.
It's very static.
Yes.
And
almost every shot of this is basically still. There are a few exceptions. Like I said, I can count on one hand the number of dynamic moving shots, like physically like dolly moving shots, than there are static shots.
And it's also 4x3.
Yes.
Which I love. I love that. It's such a unique choice, and I think it really, because it narrows your perspective a lot on what you're seeing. And I think for him to, because he doesn't use many cuts in that conversation that they have, which is really interesting.
No.
He does mainly that shot, that profile shot with both of them, and I love that because you got to see the reaction of the two of them together. It's actually one of the only, like, come to think of it, it's one of the very few shots where people are like sitting, because there's a lot of conversations in this movie.
Yeah.
It's one of the only shots where both people are in frame for a majority of the time. Because you see a lot of times, like, there's a scene later.
Shot, reverse shot.
It's shot, reverse shot, or there's definitely a perspective. Like, I'm thinking of one scene in particular where Reverend Toller has a conversation, a very heated conversation with a choir director that he was previously romantically involved with on a staircase. And it's a very harsh conversation, and you can definitely tell that even though they're both in the shot, there's somebody who's dominating the discussion. But this is a very, like, even scene, and honestly, I'm very impressed with the writing too, because Michael in this scene has so much, like, rich thinking.
And he has a lot of heart as well.
And he's very open to what Toller is saying about the theological side of things. And I love that, because I think that's a perspective that in Christian-themed, theologically driven films, how much do we really get that, where somebody who is described explicitly as not the religious one, that they're talking like that. I love that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Basically, I mean, it's all very one-sided when it comes to those kinds of movies.
Yeah.
This is it starts off on one side with Toller, but then we get to see him gradually move and change to something much different.
Amazing journal.
Yes.
So throughout the whole movie, he's journaling, and we get to hear his thoughts progress from where they were at the beginning of the film to where they end up being at the end of the film. And that's such an incredible device to use. Because even during that scene where he and Michael are having this conversation, we freeze for a while, and we can hear Toller's inner thoughts working.
Right.
And it's such a great way to get a perspective on a character.
Yeah.
And to watch him think and to kind of work things out with him as he goes.
Yeah. And how at moments he's like, I'm going to tear out these pages, or I shouldn't have said that. And we see very early on that he is not a perfect person. And I like that these movies show the movies like this that show a priest that is not a perfect person.
Right.
Dive into that idea and how, and at one moment he actually does rip out 2 pages. We don't ever see him do it actively, but we see writing in his next entry that there are 2 remains of what used to be pages of journaling there. I just find it to be very interesting. I don't know if we ever got what was on those pages.
I don't think we did.
I think
he left it up to us to kind of think he was writing at those moments.
I think he did, because I think he did dictate those to us.
I couldn't remember if we did or not.
The way I took it was the last couple journal entries that he had, he was taking those out. Because you definitely see, like, there's a lot of, I don't want to say wishy-washiness, but there's a lot of uncertainty on his part. There's a lot of...
there's a lot of doubt.
Yeah, I was trying to refrain from using that word because that conjures up something else in the Christian side of things.
No, I like doubt.
But yeah, there's a lot of doubt as to what he is thinking about all this for a while. And then I'm pretty sure those couple journal entries where he was like really not sure what to think. Right after that, he starts looking at footage of suicide bombers on the internet.
YouTubes.
Yeah. And then right after that, I think is when he tears them out.
Yeah.
So I'll kind of want to go back just a little bit to when you were talking about style, Jacob, because this movie is shot in 4:3. It is very traditional in its looks, not only with Toller and the church
and the opening
themes
credits
and things like that, but yes, the opening credits as well, because we have, like the older style of movies, opening credits, not just like actors and stuff like that, but we get basically the whole cast, everything that you would normally see in a movie from the 50s or something like that.
And it's done with that like 2-column. It's very traditional.
Right. And the title card. Yeah, and the title card itself is in a very fancy font. It's very traditional.
Yeah.
And then it slowly fades in to get to the church. It's essentially black and white when it begins, and then eventually
we
it
finally
gains
start
color.
getting some color and some movement.
Yeah, exactly. And I find it to be very interesting, and I love how it carries out the entire movie, because basically Reverend Toller is pretty traditional in his thoughts just because of what's happened and where he's at. And then we have, on top of that, the church that he is basically in charge of. Is coming on his 250th anniversary of the church alone. Very traditional, very old, and we get to see how Reverend Toller, his mind changes from a very traditional way of thinking to a very new age way of thinking.
Yeah, talking about technique, and we can feel free to edit this bit out because I don't know if it's going to be pertinent to what actually we're talking about. But do you guys think that this film, like, what do you think it would have done if it was shot in black and white instead of color?
I think that may have taken away from it.
I agree.
Because
taken away from like the realistic aspect of it? Like,
I would say more like
colors
the impact.
add a lot of tone.
Yeah.
Especially
at one moment.
It's a very desaturated look for the film.
Yeah, it is.
Like, there's the color that's there is kind of pale. It's kind of bleak. So it's pretty like...
Yeah, the colors are very important.
Yeah. And
I think without color, we lose a lot.
Yeah. I know at one moment when Mary comes over to Toller's house and she essentially lays on top of him, and then we have that scene of them raising up, and then the background changes to something different, and them flying over like this mountain and things like that. That's where I think the color is... What?
It all poops out.
Yes.
And we're flying over a desolate wasteland.
Exactly.
Of rubber tires.
Exactly.
Oh, no, the rubber tires, yeah.
And so in that moment, I think the color needs to be there.
Yeah, we have to have that.
Yeah. And then, then it transforms into more devoid, drab, washed out colors, with the tires and the... it was the river with a ship, I think it was a shipping liner. Or no, a store, it was like a... I forget the technical term for it, but there's a ship like sinking next to bulk or whatever. So
yeah, it's in that lake that they show a lot,
right?
Which he goes to a couple times.
Mm-hmm.
Michael has his ashes spread there, and then he kind of just goes there to like meditate
later, to just kind of process.
Right.
So the story chugging right along. We just kind of watch him devolve into this new way of thinking. It causes conflict with virtually everyone.
Yeah.
Everyone that cares about him, everyone that appears to care about him, because of the way he's thinking. He's like, well, all these things are wrong, and they're all trying to convince him that he's not living in the real world, and he's just saying, you guys are just so blinded by all these things that you can't see what's really going on here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty much the thus and so of the whole movie.
Right.
We climax on the 250th anniversary, and then he starts covering himself in barbed wire, and
which wasn't his original plan.
No, his original plan was to use the bomber jacket.
He was going to be because the church was part of the Underground Railroad, and there was a little. At least that's what I got. Was that like at one point he was going to use the trap door as where he was going to hide and then blow everybody up.
See, what I got was more of okay. So it was either a spokesperson or the CEO of Bulk was going to be there, and
yes, CEO,
yeah, and then of course Pastor of Abundant Life is going to be there as well. So his plan was to try and to disassemble that establishment by taking down those two big heads.
Yeah, he was going to become a martyr.
That was his idea,
right? And his own establishment in the process.
Which was like the risk that he had to take to get there.
Yeah, yeah.
But he was only going to do that because Mary wasn't supposed to be there. She was moving away.
And he told her not to be there.
And then she showed up, so he was like, well, I need to do something else now. So he decides to cover himself in some barbed wire, and then he was going to drink some Drano.
Yep. Which he got the barbed wire from a little bit earlier when he was working out in the cemetery and found I think it was a rabbit. He gotten caught, and so he takes the rabbit and then takes the rabbit out of the barbed wire and then unwinds it by the barbed wire. And that's how he set up the barbed wire from then on. And the Drano from earlier as well.
He was using it to unclog his toilet or something like that. Yeah.
Which we should also touch on
his health problems.
Yeah, his cancer, because
that is definitely a motivator in his mentality if he has nothing to lose.
Yeah,
because he's been given this diagnosis, and he's like, well, that's just one more thing.
Right.
Yeah.
I was already feeling like we're doomed, and now I'm doomed.
Yeah.
So I need to do whatever it takes to get people's attention.
Right. And I see this as, okay, so Mary is having a child. The child is on the way, right? The church is having its 250th anniversary because it is just so old. So, and then of course Toller has cancer. He's going to die, essentially, is what the movie's alluding to, because he keeps delaying his checkups. When he does find out it is, I forget what kind of cancer, but it is a...
Do they ever say?
They said...
They mentioned it, I just can't remember what it is.
Yeah, I forget exactly what kind of cancer it was.
It wasn't super serious, but it was just serious enough to make him think that it wasn't even worth his time trying to get better.
Right. So I kind of see this as Reverend Toller and his church are essentially the same thing. They're both basically are on the verge of death at this point. Or getting to that.
This just like horrible,
right?
Like pseudo living.
Right. They're not exactly what they used to be anymore. And then when Mary comes along with this new child who's giving birth to new life, and then at one moment, I think it's at one moment, maybe I'm getting confused with Hereditary. They are both like wet and it's like raining, but I think I'm getting it confused with Hereditary.
What's the whole wetness about?
I don't know. Forget it. I'm just going to move on.
That's probably Hereditary.
Yeah.
But yeah, then we see Mary come in and essentially show him that, this isn't the way necessarily.
Yeah. She kind of walks in as he's getting ready to drink the Drano.
Yeah.
And
then he drops the glass.
He drops the glass and is like, there is some hope here.
Yeah.
And there's no dialogue in that scene.
She saves him.
Right.
I loved that.
God didn't save him. She saved him.
Yeah. And what do you think Mary's whole reason for being in this movie is, other than this one moment? Because I kind of have an answer, but I'm not so sure completely as to what her what her role is in the story, other than saving Reverend Toller.
What do you think?
I don't know. That's the thing.
That might be her primary reason for being.
I think
is to continue to show him that there's some kind of goodness out there, even when he essentially takes the position of where Michael was before he died.
Yeah. Well, I guess the more I think about it, okay, let's take it in a very literal sense. You said be right at the beginning of the spoiler session that her name is Mary. She's giving birth to a child. Obviously, this is a reference to or an allegory to the birth of Christ.
Yep.
And I don't think the movie ever explicitly states that her and her boyfriend at the time, Michael, did have sex, but it's pretty much heavily implied.
They were married.
They were married?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know they were.
Yeah.
I thought they
was
weren't.
her husband.
Okay. Well, anyways, yeah. So this child that she has is birthed from. He and or I think it's a he. We find out later. He is birthed, which is once again goes to prove your what you just said. He is birthed from a guy who is very scared of the environment and where this world is headed. Then again, this child is essentially what saves Reverend Toller in the end, him
it's
and
the
Mary.
Symbolism that it could save
Right.
everything.
Right. So yeah, obviously this is. I think this in the grand scheme of things points to him coming back and being reminded that the reason why we are still living today is because of Christ and everything like that, and all that entails. Wow. All comes full circle.
Explosion. Yeah.
Metaphors.
Right. I want to keep talking about themes, but first let's get through the tech stuff real quick.
Okay.
Which we've already touched on. Cinematography. Amazing.
We touched on color.
Yeah, we touched on color.
Mm-hmm.
Acting. This is one of the best performances I've ever seen from Ethan Hawke, if not the best.
I can agree with that. Absolutely.
I've only seen 2, but yes.
I mean, he's a very versatile actor, but I think
yes, he is,
I think this is
holy crap.
This is probably his best performance.
Good.
Yeah.
And the whole movie centers around him.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to judge.
Is he ever not in a scene in this movie? I don't
think so.
No.
Like, I don't think he's never off camera.
Yeah, he's in every scene. We talked about a little bit before our spoiler discussion. You said that you had some issues with some of the other acting. It felt a little campy, a little cheesy. I can agree with you, but also that's definitely how church people are, literally all of the time.
Or rather, and this is the way I took it, because he's in every scene. Like, we have a very one-sided perspective in this film. So because of that, it's almost like how I don't want to generalize all clergy members out there, but like this is how sometimes clergy members can take their congregants and they can.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Every time he would be doing something, I was like, I've done this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel like I'm watching like my whole life on screen.
Right.
So, Alan, you watching this, just know that that's how I live my whole life, minus the barbed wire stuff.
Yeah, I do. I do know that you did mention this last night. That this is basically your entire life as a movie,
or is it minus the barbed wire
which
stuff?
was so interesting.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. The acting wasn't amazing, but at the same time, it totally fit.
Right.
At least from my own experience, it completely fit.
Yeah, the moments I think you're talking about, Curtis, are like when it's really over the top. I think you used the word hammy last night.
Hammy,
bacony, porky, whatever you want to call it.
Like those megachurch boys felt like they were coming straight out of a megachurch.
Yeah.
It was crazy. And that's, yes, it's stereotypical, but like that's coming from that perspective, that's totally what everybody thinks of when you think of that. So they nailed it. It was a hammy, absolutely, but Christians are hammy. So it's hard for me to complain about that as much as I agree with you that is definitely a fair criticism.
Right. Yeah. Right. So before we go too far, I want to take the perspective of somebody who has never seen this kind of movie before. They, for all intents and purposes, they are not ones that go to church or participate in said things. They are not somebody who goes and sees these kinds of movies very often. I mean, probably for obvious reasons. Either it's too slow and kind of boring in their mind, or it's just overly preachy. Whatever the case may be, I want to take the perspective real quick of, say, somebody who this is not the kind of film that they're used to seeing, right? I can see this being quite a jarring movie.
I would agree.
For many intents and purposes, because aside from style, I think that it could, in their minds, what they could read from it is that Reverend Toller is lost his faith in the end.
Which he does explicitly state he has not.
Right.
Yeah.
Although it seems we're on agreement here, that is not necessarily the case. I can see somebody coming in and thinking this is what happened, that he has lost his faith.
And that he's just in denial.
I would personally argue that his faith is just transforming itself.
Yes, I would too.
Yeah.
And that he has not lost it. Rather, he has gained experience that has caused him to change his perspective on it.
Right.
Which is very important, and I think everybody needs to do all the time.
Right. And so
it's just a traumatic experience for him, because it can be a traumatic experience for anybody going through that, especially somebody that's doing the work and living out those experiences at the same time. Yeah. But absolutely, I could totally see where it would feel like he's like, I'm done.
Right. Right. Or that he was right. This new age way of thinking, the world is going to end. Nobody's doing anything about the environment and things like that. Although those are still very valid points, I can see where some people can be pointed in that direction and only take that piece of information from the movie.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But
don't do that.
Do be warned, that's only a small portion of this movie. And once again,
don't do that, kiddos.
Yeah, it steers more towards the overarching themes of the whole movie, not necessarily something that the movie is trying to say outright. Because if there's one thing that this movie is trying to say, it's a lot. There is a lot of stuff in this movie. This movie is quite a dense movie.
Which we kind of summed up last night.
Right.
Yeah. How would we do that? What's the best way to summarize just the overarching theme?
That's where I had an issue, because I really couldn't think of the best way to summarize it, because it is essentially a three-act movie, but each act is so fundamentally different in terms of representing an idea than the last, but they all serve to represent the same idea in the very end, that it is just hard to kind of mesh it all together and talk about it as a summary.
I summarized it last night, and I think this is where I'm settling, as the following. Sometimes people don't like authenticity because it's dirty. They just want the idea of authenticity. Mm-hmm. And when someone finally discovers that there's dirt underneath all the plastic, that it changes everything.
Right.
And people are drawn away from it. But in reality, that is the highest form of being that you can attain.
Right. And I definitely see that exact same thing. More specifically, I would point towards being blinded by financial gain, because
I agree.
Abundant life is okay. So this movie is essentially talks about, in Act 1, the idea that life is precious, and we get that from the conversation. Yeah, we get that from the conversation with Michael and his new kid that's coming. We get that with Reverend Toller and how we get to know him because of how old he is in the church and all this kind of stuff. And then we get to part 2, which is very more centered towards the environmental stuff, and also kind of bleeds into part 3.
Part 3 really focuses on
the more financial stuff.
Yeah, the church juxtapositions in terms of finance.
Right. And so essentially what I'm seeing is life is precious, yes, but more to the fact of what you were saying, Curtis, when you find dirt underneath what looks good, then there's an issue. And then when we find that abundant life, being ironically called abundant life, really doesn't care for, it really doesn't care for the environment that it's protecting. You've got integrity there. You're talking at this point about character when it all comes down to it as well.
I agree.
Yeah, I see it a little bit differently.
Well, you're wrong, so.
Obviously. Because this film totally has only one valid interpretation.
That's
obviously.
What I just said.
Only one.
You're wrong.
Only one.
So
I want to go back to that youth group scene, because I think there's a lot in there that kind of because that comes about.
Oh yeah.
Because that comes about
Yeah.
that comes about the midpoint of the film, and there's a line of dialogue afterwards where. So basically, what happens in this scene
Was
is
that like Cedric the Entertainer's monologue about how kids today don't
yes
want gray areas?
yes
Oh,
that scene leads into that. So basically, what happens is there's this big rant about political correctness, and then somebody goes basically in this youth group discussion,
like a small group.
it's a small group discussion. There's a point raised about this girl's father losing her job, and then from there, everybody fractures into their respective sides of the aisle, like very far in each direction.
Like it was wild.
It went from like we're having this nice discussion about some really deep topics to like everything was extreme.
Yeah.
And Toller mentions that. And he says, like, there's no middle ground. Everything's just so extreme. And then Jeffers says, these are frightening times. These kids, they want certainty. Don't think, follow. Like, that's what they want.
Right.
And I think what's really funny is I think the whole movie hinges on the idea of a fear of extremes.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
It fears the extremes in the environmental lobby. It fears the political extremes. And it fears it fears paradox. It fears juxtaposition. It fears everything like that. And everything about this movie comes back to that and says, these things can exist in not harmony, but they can exist together. They can coexist.
Right.
Because
you need to jump into the dirt.
Yeah. Like we see the tension between modern and ancient filmmaking. We see the tension between like old ways of theology, new ways of theology. We see the tension between big money and no money. We see the tension between right wing, left wing. We see
And
the
a
tension
lot of
between
times how they don't work together, but how they could and should work together.
Right.
Yeah, the film doesn't really. I don't think it answers all the questions it asks, but that's kind of its point.
Exactly. It wants to highlight the fact that answers are solvable, but like that we don't have them. We just have to work towards them.
And also, the answers are unique.
Yeah.
Every
Unique to context.
every problem in this movie, I think, is left unanswered because it's meant to act as a springboard for something in the real world, and I love that.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
That's kind of like, I don't know if we're all kind of saying the same thing from different perspectives.
It sounds like we are.
Yeah. It sounds like it.
Yeah,
But yeah, I mean, I would to kind of add on just a little bit to what you're saying there, Jacob. Yeah, especially when it comes new and old ways of thinking, especially when it comes down to the pastor of Abundant Life. And essentially, Ethan Hawke says he's blinded by money. You know, that he doesn't live. And then Jeff Jeffers comes back and says, "You're not living in this reality." You know, when we were talking last night, it's pretty much the opposite. He is so consumed. Reverend Toller has had a taste, in my mind, of a world outside of his bubble, to like you said, such an extreme. Where Jeff Jeffers maybe not so much, where he's very much in his walled garden in his own perspective, because he lives and operates this very high budget, high end church, right? And so when Reverend Toller comes in with these new things that he just learned, he brushes him off and says, "You are ridiculous. You're living in some kind of reality that doesn't exist." You know?
Yeah, and
which is totally opposite with what's really happening.
yeah, and to kind of juxtapose.
Yeah.
Another instance of that word.
Get out of here, Curtis.
So Toller, so like you're talking about, Jeffers is like a walled garden almost.
Yeah.
Toller is isolated, but for the complete opposite reason.
Oh, yeah.
Like he's an island.
This whole movie is just contrasting things fighting each other. All
Absolutely.
The time.
Yeah.
I love it.
And
I do really like that we have
Yeah.
two different sides of pastoring and clashing heads together.
well, and he's in exile in every direction if you think about it, because he says early on, like when he's writing his journal, like, I'm going to do this, like I'm going to write something to the effect of, I'm going to write this every day, but that might not happen because I'm only going to write when I feel like God can hear me. So he's definitely had a blow to his faith in the loss of his son, and also in kind of the fact that he feels like he's the one that caused it.
For decent reasons.
Yeah, and I'd say that's pretty well founded. But he also is kind of, where did I read this? Shout out to Alyssa Wilkinson on Vox.com. She had a great review of this that helped me clarify a lot of my thoughts on like how to reconcile some of the things that we were talking about with some of the things that I kind of slept on last night. He's also isolated from...
You slept with things last night?
Whoa, Jacob, chill. This is a Christian podcast.
I decided to go all hereditary and make a stuffed animal out of First Reformed and some stuffed animals that I had in the apartment.
No sleeping with me, thanks. I'm a Christian.
Except that he's below you, Curtis. I'm so sorry.
Oh.
As above, so below.
I don't want to talk about that
movie. But he's also... he's not just he doesn't feel like he's just isolated from God. He's also isolated. I don't know what I was going to say. Something about idolatry, probably. He was isolated from this platitudinal way of thinking. Like he's isolated from the complacency that he feels that Jeffers is also having. So I don't know. There's so much.
Yeah, we could talk about this for hours, and we probably have already.
Yeah. I got an hour 7, about 8 now.
I think we've covered most of the big stuff, though.
Mm-hmm.
So should we just give our final thoughts and a rating if we have one?
Sure. So essentially, Jacob, I know that you have a little bit of a different way of rating. You can go ahead and rate however you do it. I know you do by 100s. But
and you
sorry,
go by 10s.
Yeah,
I'm very weird.
I'll go ahead and you can go ahead and start, Curtis, and then I'll let you go next, Jacob, and then I'll finish it off.
Okay.
First Reformed is probably my favorite movie I've seen this summer. In terms of depth and meaning and entertainment value and all that kind of stuff. Falling second very closely to Avengers Infinity War just because I'm a sucker for comics.
Boo.
Because I just love comics.
Classic.
But that's irrelevant. In terms of like a movie that like really, really matters, this is a movie that I will keep coming back to. And biases aside, this is my favorite movie of the summer so far. As to whether or not I have any just criticisms for it, I can't think of anything else, honestly, besides the things that you said. Mm-hmm. And even those things work for me.
Right.
Because they make sense to me from where I'm coming from. That doesn't mean that they're not valid. It just means that they don't bother me. So, in terms of recommend, please go see this. Movies like this need to keep being made. Please go see it, no matter your fears of it or whatever. It may surprise you in terms of where it takes you, because it's just a wonderful ride to be a part of, and I will be more than happy to return to this again and again and again.
Yeah.
As far as a rating, I don't know that I want to give it a 10, just because it's not done sitting with me yet. So I think for now, I'll give it somewhere between an 8 and a 9. Just because I don't want to judge too quickly while it's still kind of settling in with me. And I know it's going to take a few more watches for it to fully settle in with me. Yeah.
Right.
So that's where I'm at on that.
All right. What do you think, Jacob?
I think this is easily, by a wide margin, my favorite film of the year so far. I think its greatest strengths lie in how it's, like, at least for me, it's very personally relatable. So again, like Curtis was saying, like, this film might scare you. This film might turn you off because of the subject matter, because it's filmed at the aspect ratio of the TVs and computers that you grew up on 20 years ago. But whatever the case may be, I honestly, there have been very few films that have affected me in the way this has. I hope that everybody listening to this and everybody who sees the trailer for this movie goes to see it in a theater because it is so good. I will probably go see this again in the next couple days, which, in the land of Movie Pass,
You have to pay for that now.
paying to go see a movie.
So sorry, Jacob.
That's a big step.
Paying to go see. I know. Like, I only do that for Star Wars now.
Whoa, chill.
Unless it's Solo.
So it's your favorite movie of the year?
It's easily my favorite movie of the year.
Interesting. Because only one movie that I've seen this year beats this movie.
The
Show Dogs.
Of course.
What is the one that beats it for you, Curtis?
Show Dogs.
Show dog.
Honestly, I honestly don't know. I just wanted to make a Show Dogs.
I have a poster in the office.
Oh, I know.
With Show Dogs that we get.
I'm
That
so
I got.
glad I
when
didn't
we
see
went to
that.
I
saw
saw it. Before they edited out that genital scene.
Ooh,
But-
yes.
So, yeah, I think everybody needs to see this film at some point. Whether it's in
Absolutely.
if you don't see it in a theater, like, I don't blame you because it's not I think a theater helps every movie. Probably doesn't help this one as much as something like Infinity War, something like that.
Also agree.
But I have no hesitation saying, definitely go see this. Do whatever you have to. Honestly, in retrospect, I probably would have driven up to Chicago to see this movie.
I wanted to, and then it came here, and I was so happy.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was really shocked because we usually don't get movies that are this small. But I have no hesitation recommending this absolutely, 100%, wholeheartedly. I can't think of any more synonyms for those things. So,
What would you rate it? You rate out of 100, right?
I rate out of 100 because that just makes it that much harder to get a perfect score. And this is the 7th perfect score I've ever given out. So it's 100. It's 100 out of 100.
So basically a 10 in our score.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. You and me talk, it's
yes.
a 10.
Yes. If I was to translate it, yeah, I have 10 for a few more rating points besides the 100. But yeah, it's the 10 of 10 of 10 of 10s. Like,
Right.
It's fantastic. Go see it.
Yep.
Al?
Yeah, First Reformed is freaking awesome. I mean, yeah, just sitting here and us talking about it has even opened
It's
up.
make me like it more.
I know that's exactly where I'm at. I've liked it now more since we left the theater and talking about it in the car on the way back, and now having it fester in my mind for just about a little over 24 hours now, which is great news because that means I can go back and I can watch it again and get even more out of it. I mentioned earlier that this is a pretty dense movie, and that is all for the better because I believe you can get so much more out of this from multiple watchings and multiple viewpoints from you guys, because I know that you guys definitely have a different view than what I have, which we've definitely talked about.
And other people will have very different views from us.
Exactly. That's why, agreeing with you guys, this is quite the important movie because you have a battle between ideas and a battle between, I saw one person say, is a battle of personal desire versus the teachings of the church. It's just, the whole movie is just, I find to be just so incredibly interesting because of these different ideas that it brings up and how, like you said, Jacob, the extremes that each side goes to and how there is a middle ground for both ideas to live in. Maybe not peacefully, maybe not the best way, but they can live together. I just find that to be wildly interesting. This is my kind of style of filmmaking, this very slow, methodical, very thought-provoking style. And the way that this movie is shot, the way that this movie is edited, is very cohesive and very tight. And even though I may have a few issues with focus, they aren't that big of a deal. It's not like a very big criticism, and I would even go as far as to say it's, at that point, a nitpick. Yeah, I'm with you, Curtis. I'm going to have to still let it sit a while, which is great news because I'm probably going to get this on Blu-ray when it comes out.
Yeah, I feel like the more I sit with it, the higher rating I'm going to give it, which is why I'm aiming at a 9 right now.
Yeah, there is so much to this movie, so much to learn, so much to explore, so much just to talk about, which we've done here. And I'm very glad that this movie came out and we have an experienced filmmaker really trying hard to make a good movie just in general. And the way that he does that.
Clearly felt like he needed to make, and that shows.
Yeah. And I know, Jacob, when you and I talked, I'm pretty sure I told this to you, Curtis, if I can tell that a director has a clear passion for his movie, it gets higher points for me. This is the case. This is the case with basically everything that I've seen from Damien Chazelle.
Yep.
This is the case for a little movie called Instructions Not Included. If I can clearly see that the director poured his heart, sweat, tears, and soul into his film, then it's just all the more impressive to me. And I saw that here.
That happened to me with Boy.
Yeah, and Boy.
Taika
Oh, yeah, I
Waititi.
forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah, you could tell that Taika Waititi was so invested in what was happening in that movie.
Exactly. And I just love seeing that kind of stuff, seeing a director really takes this idea and then take his film and really, really push hard for it to be good. So, yes.
I agree.
Yeah. I'm with you, Curtis. I need to sit. Of course, needs to sit for a while. But these are thoughts that we're just having no more than 24 hours after the movie. And I'm still giving it a 9 out of 10, highest of highest recommends, because it is just so interesting. And even for somebody who may not necessarily be a Christian, I think there is still plenty to learn from this movie, and even a different avenue of what it could go down. Which
Absolutely.
I find even great.
Which I'd be interested to explore.
Because honestly, I think if you go into this movie as a non-Christian or even as a non-clergy member, and even if you hate everything it says, I don't think you'd regret seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think it poses enough questions that are left pretty open-ended that I think you can get a lot out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is not one that's going to try and convert you. Not one that you would consider to be propaganda.
If you want that, I've got a list.
Yeah, we know some movies that are like that. This is not that kind of movie.
Jesus, man.
Oh.
Hey, Scotty. Jesus,
man. Cool it, Scott.
Cool it, Todd.
There it is, Todd. That's
Cool it, Todd.
Cool it, Todd.
With the cheap Anthony Hopkins knockoff playing an angel.
Cool it, Todd.
Classic. Anyways,
I love that movie.
Yeah, 9 out of 10 for me. Highest recommends.
You guys got to see it.
Yeah, it is that good. Even if, and it's kind of said this is
4 of you that are listening. You got to see it.
Right. It is kind of a shame that movies that are so good only get so much attention, only get to be shown on so many screens. But this one is getting a wider release now that we've seen it in our theaters, which is, we talked about this before, Curtis.
It shockingly has made it here.
Yes, somehow, some way, it made it to our theaters.
I wouldn't be surprised if somebody pushed to bring it here, honestly.
Mm-hmm. That's very possible. Well, anything else you guys want to say before we close it up?
Don't think so.
Do you want a theater count?
A theater count for the First Reformed currently?
Sure. I can bring up, so I'm looking at Box Office Mojo just so everybody knows that my stuff is legit.
Classic.
So since it's only up, wow, that's a really narrow, it's only at this week it's only in 334 theaters.
Wow.
And we got it, which we're in a,
it was only in 91 the week before.
Yeah, and we're not in a community that would get this movie until a couple months from now, if we got it at all.
Yeah.
My only thinking on that is that we're just that close to the city.
Yeah.
Very possible.
Because we get a weird hodgepodge of things just because we're so closely located to Chicago.
Or that they're trying to not concentrate things so much close to the city. They're trying to get it a little bit further out.
Yeah.
And
it was already playing in Chicago 3 weeks ago.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and if A24, if that's the case, props to you.
Let's go A24. Keep up the good work.
Yeah. What is up with A24?
You guys are killing it. You got this sweet podcast now. You're dropping all these really good movies.
I mean, yeah.
You've got Hereditary and First Reformed in theaters right now.
And we saw them the same week.
You guys are doing great, man.
Yeah, not just that. You've got a ghost story that I absolutely love.
You have Lady Bird.
You're getting Oscar winners, A24.
I know. I am very impressed. I am very impressed with A24 and everything that they're putting out.
Keep up the good work, guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
And go listen to their podcasts because they're super interesting.
Hey, they are very interesting. Very good.
And go subscribe to their YouTube channel because that way you'll know when new stuff is coming out from them. Because they're great.
And follow them on Twitter because they're really funny on Twitter.
Are they really?
Yes.
Are they funnier than Wendy's?
Different kind of funny.
Okay. Good.
Like today they tweeted about how there's this okay, so you know how Trump met with Kim Jong-un?
No, I haven't seen
He showed him like this fake movie trailer about like the prosperity of life that would happen if they became friends.
I heard about that.
And A24 tweeted about it and said something like, "Stay in your lane" in all caps, and it was so funny.
That is hilarious.
Was it starring Seth Rogen, James Franco, and
No, it was
Randall
starring
Park?
a narrator and random footage of both of them.
That is hilarious.
It was so funny. You got to watch it.
I'm still convinced it was the outtakes from the interview, but
It's wild.
Well, I think that just about wraps it up. Once again, thanks for coming on, Jacob.
Yeah.
And talking
My
with us
pleasure.
about
You
us.
suck at this, so
Yeah.
we probably won't have you back ever.
Link to his stuff in the description. He has some pretty great reviews that are relatively short, but are quite
They're
in-depth.
fine.
Yeah.
yeah, this one for First Reformed is gonna be a little bit longer. But yeah,
Right.
thanks for having me on, Alan.
Not a problem,
I really
man.
appreciate it.
Not a problem at all.
I'd love to come back and do this again, unless Curtis thinks I suck too much at
He
this.
does. I don't know why he's here.
But yeah, for all 5 of you, I'll inflate it by 1 this week, since I'm going to plug this because this has been really fun.
Class.
But yeah, if you're listening to this and you don't know where my blog is, it's in the description.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'll make sure it is there.
and you know what? If you don't read it, that's fine too. It's just a fun thing that I like to do, just because I love movies and I like talking about them and I like writing. So yeah.
And thanks, Curtis, for coming back.
Yeah. It's fine, I guess.
You know, I almost didn't ask you back for this one.
Yeah, I figured.
Yeah.
We're
All
not
right.
really friends.
Well, that basically wraps it up. Thanks for listening, guys. I think next week, if this comes out in time.
And gals,
And
hold
gals.
on.
Sorry, my
This
bad.
is 2018.
I'm
everybody
sorry,
in
my
between.
bad. Guys and gals. Next week is, racking my memory. It's a movie that we're reviewing, Corbin and I. It's either No, Ghost in the Shell.
Ghost
That's
in the
it.
Shell. You guys just recorded that.
We recorded that 2 days ago.
Yeah,
you said.
you guys recorded that just a few days ago.
2 days ago.
Today is Tuesday.
No, it was yesterday.
Yeah, it was yesterday.
Yeah.
That's right.
We recorded it yesterday from the time of this recording. Very in-depth, very interesting discussion. I would highly recommend you go see it, go listen to it if it isn't
To be clear,
up yet
he's talking
already.
about Ghost in the Shell, the anime, not
Yes.
the movie with
Correct.
Scarlett Johansson.
Yes, we will get to that eventually. It's a retrospective.
Rest in
But
peace.
for right now, it is the 1995 cult hit anime, and it goes in the show. Anyways, that's up if it isn't. It's going to be up soon if it isn't up already. Thanks for listening, guys. Hopefully, we get to do this more often. I know Curtis and I are. This is kind of like a regular thing for us now, and hopefully, we get to have Jacob on for some more, depending on how it goes in the future. Anyways, thanks for listening, and we'll see you later.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.
But now looking at his writing credits, I am.
The frick did you do?
Somebody's buzzing, and I don't like it. Might be me.
I don't know if it's. I don't think it's the audio feed from the laptop, is it?
Well, whatever it is basically gone now. Where were we? What were we talking about?
We're talking about Paul Schrader
Oh, yeah.
and his writing credits and how good of a writer he is.
Yeah. So,
And director,
Yeah.
but he doesn't have as many director credits to his name.
Right.
Mostly writing credits.
Right.